Our speaker today, and I want to acknowledge the folks that have made this possible, which are Mike and Rebecca Bogan, who are both alumni of our department and alumni of the university, and through a generous donation to our department, they make this speaker series possible. We're only on our second speaker, so we are building momentum here, and we would like to make this something that we have at least a couple of times per semester. And it's important, I think, to bring in people with a different perspective. Our speaker today is from Portland, Oregon, and he is the president of Pacific Landscape Management, which is about a 25-year going concern at this point.
22, yeah.
22 years he's been in business as owner and president of that company. As importantly, I would say, is what he's giving back to the industry in the form of his involvement in the National Association of Landscape Professionals, which he is the immediate past president of NALP and is the newly appointed chair of the Sustainability Council, which was a committee just last year, but the association has seen it through to becoming a council on sustainability. And so we invited Bob, partly because of his expertise and his experience in managing the waters of sustainability from both a regulatory standpoint, but also Bob's an avid outdoors person, and he has a genuine love for the things that he's going to talk about. And I think that it's important to talk about that aspect of his life, because I think it really is an important, as far as I know, a very important part of who he is. I got to spend a fair amount of time with Bob. He just, spring before last, rode the entirety of the Natchez Trace from Nashville to Natchez, and so he got to know this state pretty well from the back of a bike. He got to know the plant materials, the plant communities of the state pretty well, and I think he fell in love with it a little bit. He definitely fell in love with the trace, and so he brings that to this discussion, I think, today. And so without any further ado, I'm going to let everybody get situated. Without any further ado, Bob Grover, president of Pacific Landscape Management.
All right. Well, thank you. As maybe just a little additional ado. There'll be further ado here. Was that ado that you get?
And ado.
Yeah, and ado. It's really my distinct honor to be invited to do this. I think it's a great opportunity to share perspective of different aspects of academia and industry, and really appreciate Mike and Rebecca for their support of this organization. I've become a really good friend of both Mike and Rebecca through our serving together at NALP, and to a degree, I graduated from Oregon State University. To a degree, very jealous of their experience here and this program, which has been, one of, if not the strongest programs historically in the country in understanding and developing our professionals going forward. So just really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And again, a little bit about my background. Talked about it a little bit more in the class earlier today, but I've never worked outside of the green industry. I started working in a retail nursery when I was in high school and fell in love. I was always an outdoors person. I thought for a while maybe I'd be a forest ranger out in Oregon, but fell in love with the nursery industry, went to Oregon State thinking I'm going to be a nurseryman, and then started working in landscaping, and my career has spanned nearly 40 years. Started Pacific in 2001, and very, very proud of what we've accomplished here, but very, very passionate. Being from Oregon, we are significantly more progressive than, and I don't want to say that in a, I'm proud of that. It's been as much of a challenge as it's been, but as our company needed to address the issue of sustainability in landscaping in Oregon, we were way ahead of the curve because of the progressive nature of the West Coast. And there were, for the longest time, and I presented this subject at our national conference, and people go, well, you know, I'm from Mississippi or I'm from Tennessee, nobody ever cares about this. Well, little by little, it is finding its way everywhere in the world, much less the United States. And very, very proud of NALP finally creating a council of this. Is one of the most important pieces of work for our industry and our trade association is to continue to enhance the urban environment, but do it in a more sustainable, focused way. So very, very proud of that. So been really focused on this subject for about 15 years. And so I won't necessarily call myself an expert. I would call myself fairly well schooled in the true practical nature of sustainable landscaping. And I have a very practical focus on knowing it's the right thing to do, but also knowing that it's hard to pull it off. It's expensive. There are choices you have to make. And you know, trying to sort through how the best way to do it affordably, have the society accept it, and have it be environmentally sensitive. So it's a combination of things. So, you know, when I entered the industry, landscaping in the early 80s was kind of a new burgeoning piece of urban development. We were creating a concrete jungle and we needed to soften it. So all of the focus back then was about making things prettier, and really weren't that focused on the environmental impacts or how important that was or what we needed to do differently. So, you know, things changed. I really think that I give a lot of credit to Al Gore in the book that he wrote of bringing the importance of sustainability and the impacts of our problem with carbon in the environment. And that started changing it for my customers started asking me about that. Prior to that, I don't think I ever had a person ask me at all in commercial landscaping about any environmental concerns, organic desires, or even that word sustainability. And as I said, very, very proud to be able to serve going forward as the chair of the Sustainability Council. I'm very proud that NALP has finally got enough support and understanding across the country to do that. We are a commercial landscape contractor serving the Portland metropolitan area. We've branched out into Seattle. You know, what is sustainable landscaping? And we've defined a definition, but I would trying to maximize the environmental value of our urban landscape while minimizing those inputs that we take to produce that. And that is a very, very challenge with fertilizers, with water, with you know, renting equipment. So it's really shaking things up, which I think is good as we look at going forward in society. We have to challenge ourselves that we can always do better. And you know, sometimes it takes a while to have things do better. Sometimes we need technology to catch up and advance. Sometimes we need to convince society that this is right and appropriate and acceptable to do certain things. So we also in NALP have done a fair amount of work in trying to create resources for our industry or resources for the population in general. One of the things that we did a couple years ago is to create this website where there's some tremendous resources in Voices for Healthy Green Spaces, of talking about what the value of all the green spaces, parks and natural areas in and around our urban environment and all the positive things they do, and even challenging us on what we're going to do differently to help make sure that we're doing that. So as I said, you know, landscapes beautify the urban environment, and that's really been the long-term focus of that. You know, we build, design, and install landscapes. We maintain all those things, and there's good value out of that, but there's impacts on that. You know, some of the things that we started looking at is they do some heavy lifting. There's some very important things that landscaping does. It sequesters carbon, it generates oxygen, processing rainwater. A lot of that, at least in Oregon, that's a big piece of having that be doing the heavy work of taking the water off of buildings and all the roadways and streets and processing that water to clean it up before it goes into the river system. You know, and cooling the concrete jungle, having shade and having green spaces in and around big parking lots and buildings are having very, very positive impact. A lot of work has gone into, I know throughout the country, but in Oregon, of developing and managing bioswales and rain gardens and green roofs, and in the future, I believe ecological lawns. I'm very excited about the work that we're seeing happening there. But as I said, our industry, of the great work that we're doing in enhancing the natural environment, that we have a bit of a bullseye on our chest of things that are having negative impacts on the environment while we're doing the positive things. Herbicides that we utilize, are they deadly poisons? Are they impacting the environment? Are they causing health concerns for our employees? Do we need to be pesticide free? And that's a good question. I don't know if we need to be pesticide free, but we need to reduce our uses of pesticides and make sure that we're using the least toxic pesticides for the environment. We irrigate landscapes across the country, and if we don't have a well-maintained irrigation system, that can really, really waste water. And should landscapes have irrigation at all anyway? I don't know. Oregon got a reputation of being a very, very rainy environment, but June, realistically, July, August, and September, it hardly rains at all. So to really have a functional landscaping, we do need some level of water, but we could do it a lot better. And fertilizer, to keep plants healthy, most of them need some level of nutrients, but the way we apply and what type of nutrients we're applying has an impact on the environment. And maybe should we be completely organic? And there are some challenges to that, but that could be a goal. And then probably the biggest concern that's come up most recently is the issue with gas-powered equipment and the negative impact that has. And there's a big focus on carbon dioxide and the carbon that it releases, but there's also just the fact that there's many other compounds in emissions that we should be concerned about. And some people say, why don't you just clean up by sweeping or raking afterwards? So that's possible, but there are some real challenges in our efficiency on that. So to a degree, sometimes you can get really, really scared about many of the tools that we have used historically are not going to be at our disposal. We're going to have to make those changes. And will our customers be willing to pay more to do things differently, or can we figure out how, with technology and improvement, can we figure out how to find a balance to have things be less environmentally impactful and still efficient? So that's what I think. Sometimes the word sustainable, people assume that means organic or it means perfection. And realistically, sustainability means you can do it forever. So we need the world to be around forever. We need the environment to be around forever. So we need to be sensitive to the environment, but we need to be able to afford it. So affordability is an important aspect of that. And then we need to have society appreciate it and like it. There are some maybe positive environmental things that my customers want their landscape to be conformed and pretty, and there might be some things there that maybe aren't acceptable because it may not giving them the image of what they're wanting within the landscape. So some of the correlations that I get is we've made some middle grounds of, a LEED building. Is the LEED building organic? No, it's not organic. We have made a lot of choices to make building efficiency much better, but they're still manufactured products. If we really wanted to be organic in building, we'd live in sod houses. Maybe that's taken to an extreme. A Prius, I need to change this slide to a Tesla today, but we've said, hey, if I'm driving a Prius or a Tesla, I am reducing my impact, but if we really wanted to be fully, we would walk or bike to work. So those are the kind of things. So what is sustainable landscaping? And again, it's reducing our impact while maximizing the value of the system. It was about 2007 we started that focus, and we said, what can we do to lessen the impact of our operations? So several things that our focus was. We want to incorporate organic fertilizers if we convert over to organics. We want to reduce our use of pesticides and insecticides through integrated pest management. We want to adopt and learn and advance the technology in irrigation technology to reduce our use of water. We want to keep on the forefront of utilizing the lowest emission equipment we use possible. Same thing with our trucks. And then there's a lot of new landscape elements that we can help make them work and be effective. Bioswales, rain gardens, green roofs. And then we said, hey, let's take a look at our business practice. What are we doing at our office and in our operations that could be more outside of the landscape? So talked to a lot, and I won't say argue, but there's some conflict in, is organic fertilizer better than synthetic fertilizer? And there's, in some ways yes, in some ways no. What is the difference? And what I hear people say, well, organics feed the soil and synthetics, maybe poison the soil. Well, I disagree with that, but I think this is a better slide. If organics feed the soil, where synthetic fertilizers feed the plant, and you bypass the positive benefit to the soil. So organics is an important aspect of trying to do that. Doing that with organic fertilizer is not necessarily always the right way. I wish that we did more soil preparation, at least in and around commercial landscapings, that we pile up the soil and we put it back and it's clay and it's heavy. And boy, if we could just amend the soil with organic matter down a foot deep of the soil that we're going to plant plants into, it would persist way better future. So probably the biggest negative impact of organics is it's very inefficient in its nutrient production. So you have to apply more and it costs more. So if I went completely organic, it would cost my customers more. And what I've found, people are very, very interested in helping improve the sustainability of our operations and how we manage the landscape until it costs them more. The other aspect of organic fertilizers that's a bit challenging is we work with a group in the Northwest called Salmon Safe. And one of their tenets is they don't necessarily want us to use organic fertilizers because based on what the source of the organic component, there's heavy metals in it, if it's any sewage sludge based, or there's just all kinds of inert things in there that can be just as bad for the fish. So they would like us to use, and we use slow release fertilizers and make sure that our practices are, we want the fertilizer to go in the landscape, stay in the landscape and not go into the storm drain and get into the creek. So we are probably more focused on, we have an organic synthetic mix and predominantly slow release sources, and then we teach our folks to keep the fertilizer in the landscape. And then pesticide use, another area, our customers don't like weeds. So how do we, and when some folks will say, well, I want you to do that, I want you to pull the weeds. Well, you can't pull a weed until you see it, and they have a struggle with that. So what can we do with our pesticide use if our customers won't put up with some level of weeds? So, some of it is, question is all herbicides, just because it's a chemical, does that inherently make it a poison? And it's kind of relative. There's a lot of focus on that state by state. It used to be a national issue, but the lack of preemption, if a state wants to ban something or other by their measure, they have the ability to do that, and it gets to be very, very difficult on a national basis to control that. The Environmental Protection Agency was established to make those decisions and evaluate that for us, and that we're losing that. There's issues of, the glyphosate and the issues and problems with glyphosate. Is it a problem? Does it cause cancer? It's not been definitively determined, but enough concern that has created a lawsuit. So, what these are good or bad things that makes it really, really challenging in our environment to know what is the right type of chemical, and hopefully we would like to believe that we have the proper ability to test and firm that. So, and again, the EPA still to this point does not see significant public health risk with glyphosate, and I'm not saying that that's not going to be found at some point, but the lawsuit is in challenge with what EPA's analysis. So what we've done, separate from those specific, is what can we do to, as opposed to eliminate, what can we do to reduce the amount and reduce the use of those more toxic chemicals? So some ideas, call it IPM or call it a spot treatment. We used to go out and twice a year spray all of our lawns for broadleaf weed control. Well, what if there's not a whole lot of weeds in there? Could you go out and we're spot spraying? We've reduced our use of broadleaf weed control by 80% by spot spraying as opposed to broadcast spraying. We've played around with other things, infrared weed burners. They've not been necessarily that efficient. We've played around with utilizing vinegar and high concentration of vinegar. One of the things we found is in the concentration level of vinegar, it technically has a higher LD50 than Roundup. Now, granted, I'm not saying you shouldn't eat vinegar on your salad, but there are, at the level of concentration you have to cause weeds, it's actually a dangerous product for an applicator to apply. So there's some challenges in there in some of those things. Oregon has been on the forefront of that, and they passed legislation about a decade ago to say, hey, We know that chemicals are going to be needed, but let's evaluate and create a list of what are low impact pesticides. And those are the only kind of pesticides that could be utilized in and around school grounds. So we have adopted that. OSU has done the study on that. And we only use those chemicals that are on the low impact pesticides. So we're not completely organic, but we are using the least amount through IPM and only those lists on the low impact pesticide list. Water conservation, and back to Oregon, is a very wet state for most of the year, but summer's very, very dry, and our water source, it's very, very challenging to expand our water source. So water conservation is very, very important. Water has become very, very expensive, and the good and the bad news of that, it's nice when economic factors help you do the right thing. We need to save water, and when water gets more and more expensive, it's easier to get the attention of a property owner to say, let us help you reduce your water usage. You might have to spend and invest into new irrigation technology or changing of your landscape, and because the water is expensive, it's getting the attention of people making those decisions. So, you know, it's simple stuff is we just need to make sure that we have a well-installed or maintained system to where the water goes on the landscape. But also sometimes it's what landscape we put where could be a challenge of maybe should we have grass on a parking island because it's hard to keep the water in the parking island. Zach Johnson at Colorado State did some interesting research of all of the focus on water use and abuse and whether it's appropriate to use water in landscaping. They determined in Colorado that only 4% of the water in Colorado was used for outdoor irrigation work. And then they also talked about all of the positive environmental impacts of that 4% of their water that utilizes. So good things are happening. So should we be 100% water usage free? No, there's a lot of positive benefit that we have out of the water. We just need to be significantly more efficient with the way we use it. So it's where does the water come from? How do we design? It's sometimes difficult with an existing irrigation system or an existing landscape that you have to make some changes. Sometimes things are installed in a way that's just going to be very, very difficult to irrigate. And then you have to make sure that you're watering properly on the schedule and you have to apply it properly. So there's a lot of things that we've done through water conservation and changing the landscape and changing the irrigation system. You know, number one is just making sure that you have a well-maintained irrigation system, that you don't have breaks, the sprinklers are shooting the right way, the products are changed in time. That's a very, very important factor. Making sure that we're programming our irrigation controllers to be the most efficient way possible. So training our people to how to do that. And then what are the things that we can do to help modify our systems to improve that? Weather-based irrigation is a big and probably the simplest, easiest way to improve that. Basically, we've adopted the Weathermatic SmartList system, but you know, you look at some irrigation graphs. We have a variable weather in the spring. We'll have a good hot stretch, and we'll go out and turn the water on, and then it'll rain for a week or two. And it's very, very difficult to know and predict when you're out on site, maybe once a week, of what will the weather be like the next week. So you err on the side of watering enough for if it's going to stay dry, and then it rains. So the whole theory of weather-based irrigation is because it's variable like that, it waters more when you need it and waters less or turns it off when you don't, and it makes that decision mathematically with weather data on a daily basis. So if you look at the black line, that's typical daily water need. It goes up throughout the year, but it really, really varies. So if you put it on a basic schedule of what the typical water usage is, you're going to be significantly over and under watering throughout the year. As we started installing weather-based irrigation, we were finding that we were saving 30 to 40% in our typical manually programmed controllers. So really, really great opportunity to save people water and have it be a 2-year return on investment on the changing of the equipment. But the also thing they also learned is kind of an interesting thing, as with any technology, if you don't know how to use it, if you don't know how to maximize the value out of it, you're not going to be able to do that. So we had a project that we were working diligently to improve. Our customer was very, very focused on water conservation. We installed weather-based irrigation in 2008. We made some system modifications in 2009, and we'd cut water in less than half over that period of time. We lost the property, and the different contractor took over. We still had access to their water bills, and because they weren't as familiar with this operating of the system, they had a 50% increase in their water usage because they weren't as familiar with the technology of the system. So really, really important to adopt technology, but also have smart people, trained people that know how to operate the system so they can get the best value out of it. And again, water has rapidly risen. I think there's 35 different water districts in the Portland metropolitan area. Some are rising higher than others for various factors, but water in general has been the fastest increasing utility cost over the last decade in the Pacific Northwest. So water is getting much more expensive and a really big focus. One of the things that we did out of that is there's kind of a random list of projects that you could do that would save water, but getting a good estimate and value out of that takes some analysis. So we put together a program about 3 years ago to propose to our customers to go out and do a detailed evaluation of their site to estimate where they have water waste and where they have opportunities, and give them some estimated costs and return on investment on those things. So first and foremost is giving a detailed map. Most irrigation controllers have, hey, it says if this is turf and it's on the front side of the property, so you don't necessarily know where it is. So we provide them a detailed map and documenting all of the technology, what type of sprinkler it is. And then we look at the components. How old are these sprinkler heads? Are they mismatched? Are there dry spots? Do we need to maybe add some sprinkler heads? Should we put drip irrigation that might be more efficient in some areas? Should we hydrozone? Is there lawn and shrub beds irrigating together? Could we split that up? And then what we found kind of surprising, one of the biggest pieces of our recommendations has been eliminating turf or changing the landscape where the landscape is just not appropriate. It's not the right place. Turf is overused. It's the cheapest component when you install a landscape, but it's the most expensive component if you put in the irrigation needs over the life of a landscape. So again, we will map it out and document all that stuff, and then we'll evaluate, hey, maybe this is an area, could we change that irrigation, or should we change the landscape? So, a lot of water is wasted through runoff, whether it's on a slope or because it has concrete surfaces on both sides. So, both of the areas. One of the issues we also look at is, hey, you have spray heads that put down water at 2 inches per hour, and most soil can't absorb more than 1/4 inch of water per hour. So having the wrong type of sprinkler head on there, maybe making some changes to the sprinkler head. So most rotor sprinkler heads put down 1/2 inch of water per hour, where the spray heads put down 2 inches of water per hour. So can we change out the sprinkler head to get the water to not run off and go into the ground? Over-pressurized sprinklers. You lose a tremendous amount of water by over-pressurizing. So pressure-related sprinklers, converting to pressure-relating sprinklers saves a lot of water. There's a variety to do that. You can do that on the valve, but more easily could do that by just changing the sprinkler. The sprinkler manufacturers all have pressure-related sprinklers at the head. MP rotators. Those put down, it's similar to a spray head, but it puts down water significantly slower, significantly less water rate, and is a much more efficient way to water than the spray head that's going to put it overhead. So here again, MP rotator puts it down at less than 1/2 inch per hour, where a spray head puts it down at 2 inches. So we're converting sprinklers out to MP rotators. Very, very proud that our state association, states are starting to adopt, a number of western states have adopted the banning of non-pressure regulated sprinkler sales, because that technology is out there. It's not a whole lot more expensive to do that. And our trade association worked and sponsored a bill in the legislature a year ago to ban the sale and that. Very, very proud of our state association with that. Drip irrigation, talked a little bit about. We don't use that as significantly, but difficult to hedgerows, very, very hard to irrigate efficiently hedgerows with spray heads, because the first shrub blocks water to go the distance. So drip irrigation is very, very in its place used. But there's a lot of places where you have mismatched heads, or you need to change, add a head, you got a wet spot, you got a dry spot, you have a shady area, you have a sunny area on the same zone, of trying to figure out how to modify the irrigation system to get the right amount of water for the right rate, and then just constantly maintaining it. Even just areas of, sometimes it's simple as, oh my gosh, the head is back in the shrub bed and it's getting blocked by a sprinkler head. So just maintenance activities. And again, what we talked about, one of the biggest things that we found is lawn is planted where maybe it shouldn't be in the long haul. So parking islands and parking tips usually have trees planted in them, and early on it's fine, but as the tree grows and as the concrete, and you got gravel on both sides, the radiated heat, it's a real problem. So here's a project: on one side there's a tree, and on the other side there's no tree, and it's on the same zone, and we're just never going to be able to get this guy watered properly. So trying to encourage people of that's not a place, if we have a tree in there, that's not a place where you should have. Or here's a big parkway, there's 45 miles an hour, why should you have lawn? It's under the trees, shady area, we could renovate that lawn, or we could just spray that grass out, stop irrigating it, and put bark dust in there, and at 45 miles an hour, that's a very, very cheaper way to maintain and less water. So, you know, we promote a lot of getting rid of lawn where lawn should not be and doing lawn conversion. So, you know, sometimes it's simple as, okay, this is fine, but we got tree roots here. Can we just make the shrub bed area bigger? We don't have to do a major. It's just spraying that out and putting bark dust over the top of it. Here again, let's just draw a line and make those areas where if we have great coverage of below area, why increase the irrigation around that tree if we just make that a shrub bed area? So, or just, hey, why we have lawn? It's the backside of the property. Nobody even sees this stuff. That is an area that probably should be some level. Or, you know, some of these just crazy areas, why do we keep trying to maintain that if you spray that out and just have that be bark dust? Doing a lot of lawn conversions. Some areas we want to put perennials and shrubs and having it be an area that used to be lawn and having it be much more attractive. So we're going to save water in that area because we don't need as much water, and we've made it look more attractive. So, you know, in some other areas, you know, these parking islands, not only is it hard to irrigate, it's hard to mow. So the cost to maintain that with the water and the mowing throughout the year. So we're working on taking those areas. If it's a parking strip or a parking island, we're going to take that out, put drought-tolerant plant material in there, and make it much easier to maintain and cheaper. Some of these parking strips, we've done a variety of experimentings. The tree roots are a serious problem, so we believe that if you're in and around concrete sidewalk or parking lot, you should have root barrier in and around there. But we did this in front of our office to where we completely redid the landscape and put that rock. We have drip irrigation into the rock. We put down maybe 10% of the water we used to, and it's a much more attractive. Love the utilization of rocks and just being very, very creative of why do we have that lawn there in and around the fire posts and the trees and it's just very, very difficult to maintain, and it looks much, much better. So on our website, we have a lot of examples of these and some videos of some of the this water conservation planning stuff that you could see. Been a great opportunity that we've had that we've hired to do these water conservation plans. We do those in the summer, getting prep people for the budgeting for the fall year, and that's been a great opportunity to bring in students to have that skill, and a great project that we've offered these water conservation plans as an internship for our country. So then we talked a little bit about emissions, and that's a real challenge. We do have power equipment that we have to operate. What do we do with that? As we looked at that about 10 years ago, some of the larger equipment manufacturers starting to convert and have the ability to convert to propane. So we've converted our fleet, all of our larger equipment to propane. And as the emission component was a big factor early on, they are less in carbon dioxide emission, but not as significant. So that hasn't provided the same value, but I still believe that propane is significantly better than gas because the only emission is carbon dioxide and water. So even though the carbon dioxide is only about 15 or 20% less. The other thing that we found is equipment manufacturers are improving, are reducing the emissions on their equipment. So we have a goal of keeping our fleet as updated as possible. Every year they improve the technology, so keeping the fleet up to date. There was a big focus over a decade ago that EPA required, so we saw a significant improvement about a decade ago, but they continue to do that. So keeping that. So the challenge of gas to electric, very excited. If you go back 6 or 7 years, there was no battery-operated electric equipment, and manufacturers started to come out with that. And the battery life and the power has been challenging. It improves every year, and we're seeing and believing the technology will get ourselves to that point. Some states, California being the leader, actually has banned, as of January 2024, they've banned the sale of all electric or all gas-powered equipment up to 25 horse, which would be basically every piece of equipment that we utilize in landscaping and many construction trades. Can we replace that with battery? Some, yes. Some, it's going to be very, very difficult. along those lines, I believe that technology will get us there, and I wish that some of these legislative bodies would work with manufacturers and be patient to allow the technology to get to that point. It's like saying, should we eliminate the production of all gas-powered vehicles? Tesla's out there, virtually every car manufacturer has. Well, they're way more expensive, and I don't think society can afford. I think it will at some point. I bet you 10 years from now, car manufacturers won't be manufacturing gas-powered vehicles, but we have to allow the technology to get ourselves there. So that'll be an interesting challenge on how we get there, and something that states like California are going to lead the track. You know, an example of where the problem is, all manufacturers make battery-powered equipment today, but the backpack blowers may be one of the more challenging ones. If you take a look at here, the best battery blower at this point, Newton force is the blowing force. It's half of the force of a commercial, and it is only 30 minutes on a battery, so it is very, very challenging to operate, have enough batteries, the cost differential, and the effectiveness. Will we get there? Will that improve? I think it will, but it is very, very challenging to produce the work. And again, our customers might want us to do that, but will they be willing to pay 10 or 15 or 20% more for us to operate battery equipment at this point? And very few of them will. So I'm not anti-battery, and in fact, NELP is pro-battery, pro-electrification, but in a responsible transition. So robotic mowers, we're seeing that more and more and more, and I believe that robotic mowers will be an influence on our industry. The technology is changing and improving year after year after year. Every time I go to the annual conference and the trade show, we're seeing new, more sophisticated, some larger ones. You're seeing golf courses go to automated mowers. It's a very, very exciting time, and again, I think, you know, in 5 or 10 years, we will have very few people walking behind a lawnmower, and that might solve some of our labor challenges as well. Green waste, and I think most states it's that way. We do take to a recycling center all of our green waste, so it's really, really exciting that is the most areas that don't used to, back in the day, that things went to a dump. Now it goes into a recycling center, gets ground up, and it's an organic amendment. That's stuff that should have been in that soil before we planted the landscape. And then I get very, very excited about the transition from landscape beautifying the urban environment to actually helping improve the urban environment. Rain gardens and bioswales are very, very exciting. Of capturing a rain garden, you know, definition of that is taking relatively clean water off of a roof and trying to put it back into the ground underneath, in and around the building where that naturally would have gone to had there not been a building there. So the example is, you know, disconnect your downspouts, create an area where you can get water infiltrate, plant it with plants. And there's just some great examples of great, phenomenal, not just doing heavy work, but an incredible visual positive impact of these things. So, you know, I love to go see by some of these where you get the water splashing. Yeah. Really, really exciting. We put in a rain garden in front of our building, and it's fun to come in or out of our office when it's raining and seeing the water seep into the ground there. And it's a much more attractive landscape than it was just a foundation planting. Bioswales. Rain gardens are kind of hard to do as an afterthought, and whether it's effective or not, but in Oregon, and I'm assuming, you know, here, you need to have a biofiltration system for your water off the parking lot. And the theory of a bioswale is to take dirty water off of the parking lot from whether it's soil or stuff coming out of the cars, of trying to clean it up and slow it down from going into the river system in and around. Really, really great in their effectiveness in helping keep our rivers safe, but they are usually planted, and they say plant it with native plant material and let it naturalize. And it takes a long time for nature to be attractive in the natural state. So we're seeing more and more these areas of transforming. As should we just have it be cattails and grasses, or could we say, could we have some more formalized plantings? And you know, we can talk about whether it's valuable to have native plants or more landscape plants, but having it be an integral part of the landscape and expected to be maintained so we keep it functionally attractive and functionally producing the water. So there's been some very, very creative ways to to have a rain garden or a bioswale be effective and attractive part of the landscape. Green roofs, seeing more and more of that in utilization in our urban centers. And it's an interesting and exciting, it's a very challenging product to manage because you have to usually climb up to the roof. The roof access is really poor, but it's very, very exciting and seeing what people are doing and having to be very strong landscape elements. So when we can do great environmental work while still having it be very, very attractive is finding that it is really, really powerful. So I think in the long term, the world buildings should have green roofs. There should be some kind of rain garden at the base of it, maybe some rain art coming down there. Parking lots, permeable pavers, bioswales, try to get as much water back into the ground. And same in the urban cores and the parkways and the street strips, as opposed to lawn there, we can have those be bio retention swales. Really, really exciting to do that in a way to where we're enhancing the visibility, the view of our urban landscapes, as well as doing really, really important work of processing the water. But you know, America loves lawns. And not only do we love lawns, it's the cheapest way to landscape an area. And sometimes people default to, should I plant a bunch of ground cover there? Should I plant a bunch of shrubs there? Sometimes it's twice as much to do shrub plantings as it is to do lawn planting, so it's lawn and people like lawns. So, you know, but are lawns climate friendly? Are they helping manage stormwater? Are they reducing the urban heat? When and where are they at the right place at the right time? It's expensive and takes a lot of resources. So like to and glad that you guys are working on that too, and I want to interact with you. Ecological lawns of basically taking blooming components as to be just grass. Clover, if it's a patch in a lawn, it's a weed. But if the entire lawn is clover or a blooming component, it's actually an ecological lawn. They take less fertilizer, less mowing, and some don't even need to be irrigated at all. And there's a pollinator component. Can we do these in a ways to where we can have these blooming components be positive to our pollinator community? So we're very, very excited about that. Oregon State's doing work with ecological lawn. I know you got a consortium with other universities, and I believe this is going to be a wave of the future of where if it's a soccer field or if it's a play area, maybe not appropriate to have an ecological lawn, especially with the pollinator component. In a park area where you want people to spread out their blanket or you're going to be playing, maybe not the best place to attract, but if it's a berm or if it's an area where nobody walks other than the guy mowing the lawn, do we need to water it and treat it that way? It can be. So very, very excited. Reduce mowing, reduce fertilization, and reduce irrigation. Really, really great ideas. And they can be very, very attractive. So very excited about what we do. The pollinator aspect of that is something that having a larger variety. So far, we've found the most success with clovers, but trying to find a wider variety of blooming components that can go in there, and ideally, blooming components that are geared at the pollinators that are in and around the region. So again, we have a lot of resources on our website in terms of some of these issues we do. So I didn't think I was going to do this, but I ran on campus yesterday and I was carrying my phone with me, and I got this brilliant idea of and please don't be offensive if I'm looking at a project that somebody did or didn't do, from a commercial landscape contractor's perspective of having served customers for 40 years, of knowing what my customers want and don't want. And the primary thing that they want is they want as low maintenance as possible, but they want it controlled and structured. So there's a big focus on native plants, and we've had a lot of discussion over the last day and a half about plant communities and bring those in. And I think that has its place, but the more intense the location that you put in a commercial landscape, the more important it is to have it be controlled and in order. A lot of change has happened over the last number of years in plant development and plant choices. And, you know, Photinia, I don't know if that's very common down here. When I started my career, one of the most common shrubs. It's beautiful. Look at the red foliage. It's a shrub that grows to 15 to 20 feet tall, and everywhere it's planted in a landscape in Oregon, they wanted it 3 to 4 feet tall. It's really hard to keep it that tall. It's a tree. You can't make a tree a shrub forever. Arbutus, it's interesting. Strawberry tree, and they're planting it as a hedge. You know, it's a tree. Don't plant trees and expect us to be able to keep them that size forever. Wax privet, maybe doesn't go quite as tall, but hey, 6 to 12 feet, wax privet. If we have to prune it, that, you know, just very, very difficult to maintain. So one of the things that have been a big focus of ours, if it requires multiple times of the year pruning, and if it wants to grow 3 or 4 or 10 times as tall as you want to maintain it, it shouldn't be there. So we've been working with our customers to re-engineer their landscape for water conservation, but to reinvent their landscape or renovate their landscape to say, hey, let's get rid of the plants that need to be pruned frequently and get back to plants that can be allowed to grow naturally to their natural height with minimal pruning, or at least annual pruning. You know, I look on campus, you know, just this is some of this super old stuff of how hard it is to deal with that, and that's an area of why we even have plant material that we ever have to prune in some of these areas. In and around the buildings, I see this all over the campus at Oregon State University of, you know, it's blocking windows. It's, you know, I think there's a liability issue. Somebody could be behind that bush walking across campus. You know, even blocking cars, visibility. We see a lot of that in commercial landscapes. I want to see in and around the corner. I don't want something to block my view. I don't want to have an accident in a parking lot because I don't see somebody coming around the corner. And whether or not that's supposed to be blocking that, you know, many plants are planted that want to be naturally taller than the environment that they're in. And then there's a ton of work. I get paid to prune, I get paid to mow, but would I love to manage without as much labor and do more landscaping with less labor because we have the right plant in the right place? I love liriope. Every time I come to the South, I see so much liriope. Easy to maintain, hardly needs any maintenance at all, very, very low. See a lot of variety and low growing shrubs. I was telling Tim that in a perfect world, plants would be pruned once per year. Prune them in the off season. If they need to be pruned in the middle of the season, it's probably the wrong type of a plant that. So these grasses, you cut them back once a year. Some of these really dwarf plants maybe never need to be pruned. So really, really like that. Lawn. In a perfect world, I would never have to mow around a tree again. Mowing around a tree slows down my ability to mow. It reduces my efficiency. And as the trees get bigger, the tree roots suck up the water from the soil around, and it's hard to grow grass around. I see a lot of examples around campus here. You know that. It's very, very difficult to do that. Do we need to have lawn there? Or maybe we could put ripberry around that tree to help keep it down. But that looks just as good to me. You know, maybe that's boring, maybe that mulch area, but I think that looks just as good as that. And it's going to be way easier to maintain and doesn't need to have any water. You know, just right out front of this building where they've, under the trees, there probably was grass under there at one point. They've gone away from that grass. So I just like some really, really examples. And the reason is, and people don't understand, and maybe many of you do, and everybody thinks that the tree underground looks exactly like it does above ground. And these roots go really, really deep. Most of the roots of most trees, especially in the urban environment where we have clay soil, are in the top 6 to 12 inches of soil, and that's where the grass roots grow. And you can't grow grass, the tree will win on all those occasions. And then it's like, why do we have this little piece of lawn there? This was at the courtyards I'm staying at. We got 2 posts, we got a little bit of grass, it's hard to mow, it's going to be hard to water. Interesting, why is there grass in that strip? It just blows me away where there's grass. And there's grass in and around that fire plug. Why is that there? Why are we designing it that way? Why not have liriope in that parking strip? Hardly will need to be maintained, and it looks better. Rocks. I love the use of rocks. We're trying to encourage our customers to accept the use of rocks. I've heard a lot of people say, well, somebody's going to pick up that rock and throw it through a window, and I've yet to experience that happening. But rocks can be very, very effective. They don't need any irrigation. Now, granted, maybe that's boring, but in this environment there, that's very, very effective. There's no reason to even have pine straw or bark mulch in there. And again, lower growing plant materials, not blocking visibility, stuff that only needs to be pruned once a year. This is just across the street from the courtyards. Love the use of liriope. Most of these plants are lower growing. some of them deciduous, very, very little pruning throughout the season, and we could argue over whether or not these are plant communities that are native to this environment, but it's very, very effective. My customers love the organization of that, and that is a significantly easier to maintain than overgrown, larger growing shrubs. So, and again, that tree, that's a challenging place to put a tree, and should it be closer to the parking lot? Are we trying to shade the parking lot? But that tree on a slope, very, very difficult. Just simple stuff like that. No trees in that lawn. I love this landscape. Does anybody know who designed that landscape? That guy should get an award. Parking trips, just shrubs and ground cover and parking strips, much better than having grass. 10 years ago, that probably would have been grass. Love your use, and Tim walked me around the courtyard of the landscape architecture contracting, of the utilization of a variety of things. Really, really hot, really, really good stuff. So hopefully I didn't pick on anything there, but just interesting to go around campus and see what makes sense and what I would challenge in our landscape design in the future. And again, just a really, really big plug, and I'm excited about the work that we've done to date, and the work that we want to do through NALP of capturing the intellect and the knowledge of the universities that we work with, as well as our industry components of capturing the methodology of how to improve the sustainability of our operations while protecting and encouraging and promoting the value of healthy green spaces, and focusing on our stewardship of the earth through the landscape. One of the things we were talking about a little earlier today is that there's an important piece of how can we enhance the environment, and whether we want to create pollinator habitat or habitat for local birds, or whether it's local animals. Oregon State has a degree called horticultural therapy, and creating an environment that is the value of green spaces in and around our communities where kids can play, where we can be outdoors and to acknowledge nature. There is a psychological value to landscape that is being understood and appreciated that I think is really, really important. And again, there's just some great resources on there about where we're at, what were the issues we're dealing with. We've formed a partnership, speaking of the conversion of gas to electric. We've formed a partner with AGSA, American Green Zone Alliance, who has the goal of reducing the use of gas equipment and focusing on low impact operations. For a while, we considered them as maybe a threat to they want to challenge our ability to do things the way we do, and we sat down and talked with them. We have an alliance. We have the same mission on how to get to the point where we are reducing the impact of our operations. We also have Love Your Landscape, which is a little bit more focused on helping educate the residential community on understanding the value of the landscaping and giving them resources on generic care of landscape elements. So really, really appreciate the work that we're doing in the community to help educate our industry as well as the environment in general. I think that is the end of my show.